Hi guys, how you doing? Today we're going to talk about the second of the integrated tasks on the speaking portion of the Toefl-IBT, and that is the general to specific task. In the general to specific task, you will be given a short reading, 75 to 100 words, about an academic subject, and you will have 30 seconds to read it. After which you will listen to a short lecture, about a minute and a half, by a university professor given on the same topic. After that, you will have 15 seconds to prepare your response and 60 seconds to make your response. The general to specific task is probably the hardest of all the speaking tasks on Toefl-IBT. And I say this for a couple of reasons. One, you're dealing with subject matter that you probably have little familiarity with in some cases. Also some vocabulary, which will make it quite difficult. And second, it depends as much on your listening and organizational skills as much as it does on your speaking skills. So for those two reasons, the general specific task is probably the hardest. But I'm here to give you a couple of tips to help you give a great response on the general to specific task.
You're most likely to encounter a task that is set up as general characteristic, specific example. In this type, the reading passage broadly defines a term, process, or idea from an academic subject, such as biology, psychology, history, literature, or economics. The listening passage then gives examples or specific details which help to illustrate the topic of the reading passage. For example, you encounter a reading which discusses the concept of camouflage and how animals use it to protect themselves. Then, in the listening passage, the professor gives a short lecture about how certain animals, like a chameleon or a sloth, use their environment to protect themselves. Or maybe you will get a lecture that discusses a counterexample, and instead of being about how an animal uses camouflage to protect themselves, it might be about a lion and how a lion uses camouflage to prey on other animals. And then you'll get a question that looks something like this. Explain how the examples of the chameleon and the sloth demonstrate the principle of camouflage. And then your job is to integrate and combine information from both the reading and the listening to answer the question. A short reading will follow. You'll have 30 seconds to read it. Let's talk a little bit now about your reading strategy. Students usually ask me, what information should I look for in the reading? Well, the answer to that is the most general information. Look at the first sentence to get your main idea. In this case, the main idea is James Joyce was a pioneer. So then what I do is I look for other information in the reading that matches this. For example, he challenged literary conventions. He pushed boundaries of narrative structure, revolutionized plot and character, revolutionized, pushed boundaries, challenged, these all being synonyms for pioneering. Okay. That he wrote about Ireland, or that he had a painful eye disease, or that he lived in poverty. This is not essential information. And I can tell this because it doesn't match with the main idea, that James Joyce was innovative. So, your strategy here is to look at the first and second sentences, extract the main idea, and then look for words in other sentences that relate to the main idea and note them down. Now listen to a short lecture given by a university professor. James Joyce lived in poverty and obscurity until 1922, when the publication of Ulysses made him one of the most celebrated novelists of the 1900s. In Ulysses, Joyce relied heavily on a literary technique called the stream of consciousness to portray his protagonist's inner thoughts in the form of an interior monologue. This technique is characterized by its unconventional use of grammar and punctuation, as it attempts to show exactly what a character is thinking. This could include incomplete thoughts, random associations, or even sensory perceptions. Although sometimes confusing, Joyce's use of the technique helped him to develop characters in a way rarely seen previously and contributes to the originality of Ulysses. Joyce did not invent this technique, but he was one of the first authors to use it so extensively in a novel. Due to the wide interest in Ulysses, the stream of consciousness technique received a lot of critical attention, and thus made Joyce one of its early pioneers. Your strategy for the listening passage should be different than your strategy for the reading passage. The first thing you should do is make a prediction of what the listening passage is going to be about based on the main idea of the reading passage. So, for example, the main idea of our reading passage was that James Joyce was a pioneer. From this information, I can predict that the lecture should be about some example of Joyce being a pioneer. So the first thing I do is predict. The second thing I do is summarize. I'm not looking for general information here, like in the reading passage. Now I'm looking for specific examples and details. That's why the task is called general specific. The reading passage gives general information, the listening passage gives specific information. So in the listening passage, I'm paying attention to the examples and details. Now let's take a look at how to put the reading passage and the listening passage together. Here's an example of what a question most likely will look like. So here are my notes for the reading and the listening passage. Now what I want to do is to come up with some kind of structure to organize my response in a logical manner. There are 3 transitions you can use to help organize your response in the general specific task. And they are in this set of materials, according to the reading passage, according to the listening passage. The first transition in this set of materials is really good because it provides a map of the response for the listener. In this set of materials, lets the listener know you're going to be talking about 2 different things. Then, the according to transitions. They let the listener know exactly what information belongs to which passage. Too many times a student just rambles without transitions, mixing up information and making it quite difficult for the listener to understand them. That's why having these transitions is so important. Let's take a close-up look at the introduction here, and you can see I have my tag in this set of materials. But then you see there are 2 blank spaces. So what information are you supposed to put there? In these blank spaces, you're going to provide the main idea of each passage. So the main idea of the reading passage is that Joyce was a literary pioneer, and the main idea of the listening passage was a unique literary technique that Joyce used in his novels. So I plug those right into the blank spaces. In this set of materials, the reading passage is about a literary pioneer, James Joyce, and the listening passage discusses a unique literary technique Joyce used in his novels. And here is what your first paragraph in your body about the reading passage should look like. And you can see it's very, very short and to the point, really concise. And that's what you should aim for when you're speaking about the reading. You should aim to put maybe 3 to 4 sentences. Remember, the reading is there just to contextualize and set up what you're going to hear in the listening, which is more important. And here you can see the paragraph about the listening passage is much larger than the one about the reading passage, almost twice the size. I use my transition according to the listening passage. I use some complex grammar structures and transitions within the paragraph. But the most important point is I make sure that I speak directly to the examples and details that have to do with the main idea of the reading passage. And so here is what your final response should look like. It should be broken into 3 paragraphs, each one introduced with a particular transition. The intro should include the main ideas of the reading and the listening, but no details and examples. The reading response should be short and concise, and the listening response should be your longest paragraph, citing the examples and details of the lecture.